I think we are live. Hello out there in pandemic land. I am John Sloss from Cinetic Media, coming to you from beautiful downtown Germantown, New York, along the banks of the Hudson River. I have with us tonight three estimable panelists for our virtual roundtable. First, Christine Vachon. Christine, where do we find you tonight?
I am in the East Village in New York City.
John Ridley, and where do we find you tonight?
I'm in Los Angeles, in the Valley.
Okay, so we've got the coast covered. Tim League, where do we find you?
Third coast, Austin, Texas. We don't really have a coast here, but they call Texas the third coast.
Yeah,
I'm in what's called Daddy Workbed, which is apparently the most dull and uninteresting place in the entire house, just kind of hanging out here.
Well, apologies for that snide reference about the flyover. We love the flyover. We love the flyover. So they say you should start these things with a joke, and I'm going to take a crack at it. A man walks into his psychiatrist and says, "Doctor, I'm extremely depressed. I don't know what it is. I've never been this way. I see life as a tedious collection of hours. And if I continue to feel this way, I don't know what I'll do." The doctor looks at him and says, "This is going to sound crazy to you, but I was at the circus the other night, and there was this clown. I think his name was Chuckles. And Chuckles was remarkable. Chuckles embodied the life force. He radiated so much joy that it was contagious, that I felt better about myself, and I think everyone in the crowd felt better about themselves. So my colleagues will kill me, but my prescription for you is go to the circus and see Chuckles the clown." The patient looks at his doctor flatly and says, "I am Chuckles the clown." All right, that just seemed oddly appropriate for the moment.
If you ever take up stand-up, I will go. I will pay. This is very good for me.
Apologies to our friend Mr. Ridley, who evidently began his career in stand-up.
Please, that was like my softcore porn days. Trying to collect all those tapes and just burn them. But I thought your Chuckles story was, I felt like you were telling my autobiography, so.
You're not, we can't transition to your softcore porn days?
They're just a lot of, gee, is it hot in here or is it me? It's just.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so we're going to get into this, but first, just some housekeeping. There are Q&As. We're going to have a section of this that it has Q&As from the audience. So you should feel free now to submit Q&As. And for the second half of this roundtable, I am going to be reading them, and I'm going to be saying your name. So better watch out what you ask. There's also what do we call it? A button along the bottom where people can add comments or chat, and you should feel free to do that. Just be kind, because that's the theme tonight. I don't know if you can see this thing behind me, but that represents my barely contained terror at COVID-19. Let's see, what else? That's basically it. We're going to try to do this for about an hour. We're going to try to keep it conversational. When I was thinking about this, I sort of envisioned, the fire pit at the Owl Bar up at Sundance and sitting around just having a conversation. So there may be some good information that slips through here, but this is meant to be conversational and personal. And we will try to entertain, I guess, where we can. The idea for this conversation sort of came from an internal conversation we were having at Cinetic about our increasing sense of isolation in the community. And obviously filmmaking by its very nature is a community activity. So this is our small effort to, increase our sense of community at what is obviously a difficult time. We at Cineta consider ourselves upbeat realists, sort of glass half full, or in my case, glass 3/4 full, because I'm a salesperson. And to complete this roundtable, we sort of looked for similarly oriented people. I don't know if they would describe themselves that way, but I think of them that way. They're sort of industry leaders, people with good minds who don't mind speaking their mind, and don't engage in corporate speak, which I think we've been hearing a lot of on these webinars, where people who just are maybe concerned to say what they really think. These people, our panelists, do not shy away from hard questions. And to show that, even before I let them talk about themselves a little bit, I'm going to start with a hard question. And that is, can you give our audience one grooming tip that you've discovered during this quarantine? Each of you needs to answer, so you might as well jump in.
Use the Zoom touch up your appearance feature, which is located right next to the video icon.
Damn.
John's looking for it right now.
Yeah, oh, yes, I'm looking for
I
it.
don't know if I can multitask, but man.
I would say my one, I don't know if it's a grooming tip, but one thing I've discovered is that my wife does indeed have a threshold for how much lack of grooming she will tolerate. And we reached it very quickly, very quickly.
I will say that it's been, I've been a shower every morning kind of guy. And I feel like that is really not necessary in a stay-at-home society. Your body tells you when you need to shower again, and I can tell you, it ain't every day.
I hope John Waters is not watching, because I think he has smell-o-vision. Noted. And I am growing the first beard of my life. And I know there's going to be a referendum on it to the extent people care. It's a hot topic of conversation in this household. So there you go. Okay, now on to the meat of the matter. I asked our panelists to sort of give a 1 to 2 minute history, description of personal history of their professional life. Just, I know you probably know a lot about each of them, but I thought in their own words they can give a bit about their personal history. Christine, do you mind if we start with you?
Sure. I'm going to keep it brief, because I assume if you guys are here, you probably know something about us. I run Killer Films. We are, this year is our 25th anniversary, which we thought we'd be celebrating right now. We've are primarily known, I think, for art house feature films. We've been moving more and more into television over the past 5 or 10 years. When the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of shooting a series for Netflix called Halston with Ewan McGregor. I'm just bringing that up because I'm sure we're going to be talking about where we all, how all of our careers were set on pause to some degree. And in the past few years, some of our notable titles include Zola and Shirley, which were both at Sundance, and I'm bringing up because they're both films that were supposed to come out in this time period, and we're grappling now with what that's going to look like and what we're going to do with them. But then also films, before that, like First Reformed, Vox Lux, Still Alice, Carol, etc. If you need to know more, you can find me on IMDb.
And Boys Don't Cry, which we were discussing yesterday.
Yeah, it's only 25 years old, but okay, Grandpa.
we were going to have a drinking game at Cinetic, and I think the number of times you were referred to me as a geezer was going to be one of the triggering items.
Oh, okay.
So you should feel free. John, a little bit of background about you, huh?
Well, as you mentioned, John, years and years and years ago, started in stand-up. I moved out to Los Angeles in the early 90s, which was actually fortuitous. Sitcoms were huge then. And also they were starting to do television with people of color that actually included people of color in the writer's room. I mean, I will say back then, I think I was in a room with a lot of people. We all thought the industry would change a lot over the years. Unfortunately, I don't think it's changed nearly as much as we would have liked to. And I'm appreciative just to even still be working at all. There was a time I transitioned from comedy to drama, and then found out that drama is so much easier than comedy. So I just stayed with that. And, you know, the rest is, you know, a slight sliver of history. You know, before the pandemic, I will say also, I was really fortunate. We were given a little bit of money to go shoot a proof of concept. We almost literally finished the week before the shutdown happened. It was very fortunate. It was just a great time. I've never enjoyed myself so much on a set. And we were kind of lucky because a lot of the conversations now, we can get into this later, but from a lot of the corporate people that I work with, I don't mean to denigrate them as corporate people, but people in a more of a corporate stance are really kind of looking toward how small of a footprint is necessary and still do a show that is quality television. So it was an interesting, you know, we didn't intend it as an experiment, but it'll be interesting to see coming out of this, whether it's a model or whether it's just, you know, a piece of work that we did.
I noted we were talking before, your studio is called No Studios. Is that intended to be a No Studios or something else?
It was when we were looking for a name and, you know, very quickly, as you and I were talking about, you know, just finding something that you can trademark and clear just becomes increasingly more difficult. And no is a Sino-Japanese word for art or skill or talent, but also artists, you know, you hear no constantly. And I just thought it was an interesting way to repurpose or appropriate no and try to turn it into a positive. And we just do as much support and incubation as we can for regional artists, particularly in Milwaukee, where I'm from and where our physical space is. And it just, you know, it's one of those things, it's a happy accident to stumble upon a word with a plurality of meanings and one that really fit our need and we could clear it.
There you go. As a lawyer, I feel you. Tim, what about you?
Well, I've only really had a handful of jobs. So I was a paper boy. I was a bus boy. I ran Ethernet cable in college. I was an engineer at Shell Oil, and then I was a movie theater owner. So that's kind of where I stuck on the last one. So I'm founder of Alamo Drafthouse Cinema and co-founder of Neon with Tom Quinn and Jeff Deutschman, who posted a snarky comment earlier. Sorry, I didn't want to type, but I don't know. Are you allowed to? Oh, fuck you, Jeff. Like, are you allowed to just like swear? I don't know if you can. It's just like for kids.
We're gonna cut you out of this anyway, so go for it.
Okay, good. All right. So we'll just rewind that and we'll edit it. We'll fix it in post.
Wait, you're telling me Deutschman's now a co-founder?
No, that's not what I'm saying. He oversees all the acquisition at Neon and is a wonderful human being. And I apologize profusely for raising my middle finger towards Jeff.
If we get to a conversation about festivals, I've got a quote from Jeff's father, Ira Deutschman, that I'm going to invoke, but
okay.
We'll see if we get there. Alamo Drafthouse. Okay, well, that's a good segue. I'm going to stick with you, Tim, and really give you an open question about the theatrical experience, about exhibition, about what's going to happen as we come out of this. Is it going to look different? Are the windows going to look different? You didn't mention that today you also became a transactional VOD magnate. So you're going to be negotiating with yourself over condensed windows. It sounds like.
That's not really what I think is the intent. Oh, you must be talking about ondemand.drafthouse.com. John, is that what you're talking about? ondemand.drafthouse.com? So
Wait,
what was the question? It was about...
Whoa. I didn't quite get that.
Since you brought up Ira, I will bring him up again because at Art House Convergence years ago, he gave a keynote address that really, really stuck with me about the exhibition industry and about this long history of the death of it. From television to cable to VHS to DVD to COVID, of like the death of cinema. And everything is proven wrong so far. And
did he know about COVID at Art House Convergence?
Well, I kind of threw that in there.
That's the headline, man. That's the takeaway.
He's very forward thinking.
Yes.
That people inherently, as a society, we want to get out of the house every once in a while. It's more true than ever right now. And so cinema is not competing against a VOD. It's not competing against home entertainment. It's competing against restaurants. It's competing against comedy clubs. It's competing about out-of-home experiences. And so, yes, I absolutely think that cinemas will survive, that we will get past this current hurdle at some point. I don't know when that is. And when we do, people are going to be very, very thirsty to gather together and watch amazing movies together. So maybe I'm stupid, but I'm bullish.
And what do you think? Do you think coming out of the pandemic, windows, there's going to be pressure on collapsing windows? Obviously, with the Peabody experiment of trolls, that's sort of thrown the whole thing into bright relief. What do you think?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen. I can say, and this is a perspective I've often had about our industry, is that certain people who produce and finance movies do it as an investment, and it's the burden of the cinemas to be a viable part of recouping that investment, right? And so we have to prove our worth. It's not a given that there's a theatrical window. But I want to be a part of a movement that says being a link in that chain in a life cycle of a film is meaningful, and it drives revenue. It increases the value of a film, and that's the pressure that I feel as an exhibitor, and I think all exhibitors should, coming out of this.
I mean, you and I have had this conversation before, and the whole idea that an industry relied on limiting access to content to get people to go to the movie theater rather than focusing on increasing the quality of the experience was maddening, and it was doomed to catch up with them. You obviously are a pioneer of enhancing the experience of film going and making it a worthy destination and worth going out of the house for. So I think the notion of collapsed windows is a positive thing.
This came up in conversation the other day, which I thought was interesting. Like, there's certainly got to be some level of compromise coming out of this, where and this is something that Megan Colligan was putting forth when she was overseeing Paramount Theatrical, of maybe there's just like a floor when the per screen average reaches a certain point that signals a trigger, and then the home entertainment window can come a certain number of weeks after that. So there's not like a defined 90 days or whatever it is, but when it's run its course through cinemas, if it's $2,000 a week per screen average, I think that was part of her proposal, then that feels okay to me. And I like the idea of there being, in the wake of this catastrophe, coming to the table and figuring out a compromise that makes sense for all parties involved.
I mean, that kind of fluidity is a great idea. And what it means is that you don't have to launch a separate marketing campaign for home entertainment 90 days after the theatrical release to draw people's attention back to it. You can segue from a popular film straight into home when the film obviously becomes slightly less popular in the theaters. I hope that really is the conversation when we come out of this. All right, shifting a little bit over to you, John. So you, I think, more than any of us have sort of fluidly worked within and outside the studio system and the independent system. I know this is sort of a super broad question, but I wanted to ask it of you since we talked for the first time. What are your feelings about, in general, or what you want to talk about working inside the studio system, or the benefits of working independently? And do you think those distinctions are going to change coming out of the situation we're in right now?
I'll be honest, and I get that question a lot, and I am fortunate. I've worked in many spaces, and I think it's less to me about independent versus studio and truly who you're working with, because I've done some independent films and they were nightmares. I mean, it was not this holistic, we're supporting you as an artist, it's about this thing that you're doing, and maybe it's weird or odd, but it's you. And by the way, this is after, this is post 12 years where, it's not like I'm trying to prove myself out of film school. There's a body of work, and this is kind of what I do, and you can like it or dislike it, but if you're going to invest in it, that's kind of what it is. But, one of the best experiences I ever had was American Crime, for ABC, for broadcast television, because it wasn't just they left me alone and didn't get notes, because I also don't think, to me, that's, independent means we're not going to engage with you or converse with you or try to, be eyes on this project and be partners in that regard. But ABC was, the checks cleared. There were great actors. We worked with amazing artists. We worked in Austin, Texas, which was, you talk about a place where everybody above the line, below the line are artisans. I probably, this is an absolute. I don't usually like to use absolutes, but I can't imagine having an experience like I had on American Crime. So to me, people talk about indies, and yeah, they're great indie producers, and we see these amazing indie films. But I've also, I've been on the Independent Spirit Committee, and not every indie film is, it needs to go from the theater straight to the Criterion channel. Not every indie producer is a producer that is really there to support artists and support material and be honest about it. I've literally worked with indie producers who were insurance salesmen. They were a little bit bigger than that. They had big checkbooks, but it's not like they really understood what makes a good producer versus working with studio executives who are like, hey, we're going to give you some notes and you can take them or leave them, but if the show doesn't work, don't expect to be on next year. And that's what kind of makes an individual hopefully a little bit more mature, not, the complete integration of freedom, but understanding what freedom really means. Freedom to succeed or freedom to fail, freedom to listen or freedom to ignore, but what are the ramifications? So I'm agnostic, and again, it's not just, oh, hey, let me do an indie film. Who are the people I'm working with? What is their track record? What do other people say? Do they really understand me? And you can still, guess wrong, and believe me, I've done that.
Christine, what do you think about that? You've worked with insurance salesmen. I recently worked on a film that had 39 executive producers. You're working with Ryan Murphy. You're working with the biggest studio in the world, Netflix, the larger market cap than Disney. You have any observation, any feeling about what it's like to work in these different realms and what you prefer?
Look, we're really pragmatic, and we're very, in the independent film world, we're very director driven, but in the television world, we're very writer director driven. Often and they're often separate. Or I guess I could say we're very showrunner driven. And so I mean, I don't want to echo a lot of what John just said. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it is about pragmatism. You're figuring out what you want to make and who is in service to that in a way that feels right for what you're trying to do. And we I mean, I don't really have much to add. We just figure out, you know, to the best of our ability. And look, for Killer, it's been a big learning curve. I mean, when we first started trying to make TV, you know, our first real splash into television, we'd done a couple of other things, was Mildred Pierce, and which we made for HBO, I think about 10 years ago. And when we walked into HBO with Kate Winslet already attached, that was unheard of. The idea that you would like package television the way you packaged movies. And I remember like HBO was like, wait, what do you mean she's already attached? And now that's, you know, now our worlds are not just colliding, they're completely interfacing, and it's hard to tell the difference anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know you to be the ultimate consummate pragmatist, and it's certainly, I'd like to consider myself that way. And in the 30 years I've been doing this, there's been an equal measure of insidious, you know, enemies of art in the independent film space as there are in the studio system. It's really, you know, specific to who you're working with, whether they're seeing the same movie you are, and what really their agenda is, and whether, obviously, in a lot of times they can get out of their own way and let you do your job.
Right, but then there's also that element of, you know, when you're building an independent film, a lot of it does have to do with, are we all making the same movie? And is there, you know, I mean, I've always considered it kind of critical, especially since so much of the independent film business is built on investors who come in and invest with their head or their heart for whatever reason, and to a certain degree, you know, protecting their interests too, so they stay in the business. And a lot of that has to do with, are we all making the same film?
Definitely. So production, you were in the middle, as you noted, of Halston,
right?
Or pretty much in the middle, right?
We were about a third of the way through, to be honest. Well,
if you must. So what is the plan? I mean, this, I guess, is a segue into the conversation. That's the endless conversation about in what way, shape, or form is production going to be restarted? And are you privy to anything that, other than what we're reading every day in I guess, the trades?
I'm really not. I mean, I'd be, you know, if any of you guys are, I'd be thrilled to hear it. I think the plan is at the moment that there will be a plan.
I mean, the one thing I would say, not to sort of take my own question and answer it, is the thing that hasn't really been touched upon that is critical to restarting is the notion of insurance. And I think it's fair to say that insurance is not going to be available. It's just not going to be an option for the foreseeable future. So I think what we need to deal with, apart from the myriad rules that they're talking about for, you know, social distancing and no crowds and all the other, you know, pragmatic, you know, sort of instinctual rules that are being promulgated, is that the companies that can self-insure, like Netflix, who doesn't really need an insurance company because they can basically, you know, afford production if it's shut down to go on hiatus and start it back. If they understand that, and people understand that it's not going to be the insurance companies to the rescue. And the second thing that people aren't talking about is that, you know, the governmental entities are going to basically have to find a way to assure the larger financiers that that if they take the precautions that are necessary, they're going to be free from claims by crew members who end up getting sick. Because if there isn't that kind of relief, I don't see how production in earnest really starts before there is a vaccine.
I can speak to that from a different industry, actually, because it's the restaurant and service industry. It's being debated in Congress and the Senate now about applying some sort of standardization for following best practices and kind of at a federal level, allowing for business to proceed without the fear of litigation if somebody does get sick. And so I think, the answer may be at a federal level for businesses to be able to continue their operation if you comply with a certain level of standards, to not be, threatened with, debilitating lawsuits. So it's being debated right now in Congress. So
it's obviously for sort of liberal-minded, right-thinking people. It's this eternal debate against protecting, labor and enabling capital to actually go to work. So to me, it's a very interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
John, sort of over to you for a second. Do you have this is sort of a open-ended question, I would say. Do you think this pandemic will in any way change what stories are told and how those stories will be told?
I think that in the immediate, I would say this, is that I was working, I can't say too much about it. I was working on a story that's a true life story, happened a few years ago. Not exactly a pandemic story, but was certainly about frontline responders, doctors, nurses who were left without resources, left without guidance, had to make some critical decisions. Any number of people died, and there were questions about what they did and why they did it. And it was an amazing story from a book by an amazing writer. I wish I could say more about it, but it's an amazing story. And we were go time on this project. And subsequently, they've pulled the plug on it. They're just this feeling, oh, we don't want to talk about this. Nobody wants to see it. And this, by the way, is something that would not be on the air at best, knowing that, production may come back early next year, would not be on the air at best for 2 years. So the concept that, and the story was also really more about systemic issues, not there is this one bad person, they're doing this awful thing, but just when systems fail, when we're not prepared, when there's not these directives, everything that we're dealing with without being on the nose. So the idea that this was pulled, around 9/11, I remember working on a project that was similar but not similar, had similar story points, and we were in the same position. 9/11 happened, and bam, they pulled it. So I just think in the now, beyond nobody knowing when production will return, nobody knowing exactly what certain appetites are going to be. Yes, people are going to want escapist entertainment. People are going to want to go and feel good, or think about other things, and I completely understand that. But I think in terms of people saying, hey, what is going to be the great post-coronavirus story, I certainly feel from my own experience that dealing with these hard systemic problems where they're not personified, here's this person who's doing bad things and we're trying to take that person down, really getting into a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, I don't see on a corporate level. I think there's one outlet in particular that would be like, yeah, we would do that if the story's great, if there's the right cast and the right director and the right writers. I think there's, in my opinion, one outlet right now that would really have that risk tolerance for it. And I'm not saying anything that I didn't say to my corporate masters. I'm just stunned that people are making decisions that are not even going to be relevant for 2 years, particularly on a story like this that they were so excited about exactly for those reasons. and now feeling like, oh my God, we can't do that story. And I know, 2.5 years from now, they're gonna be scrambling. Oh, where's our COVID story? Where's our story about, systemic problems?
Right.
Particularly for people of color, where we
Right.
see it's not a guy in a white hood who's coming after us. It's these ongoing systemic issues. And that's what pains me, is that, this is the kind of story. If I wasn't excited about it before, I'm so excited about it now. And it's like, oh no, God, we can't do that. Because we think 2 years from now, the audience is going to be X or Y. We don't know what the audience is going to be.
Well, I guess somewhat related to that, the issue of diversity, and this is for Christine and John, the improvement, the movement that's been made, I guess, to the extent you would say that through the MeToo movement. Do you think the pandemic's going to affect that momentum in any way? Do you think it's going to accelerate it? Do you think it's going to slow it down? Do you think it's going to have any impact whatsoever?
Christine?
I don't know. I mean, I think it goes back to and sort of following on John's response about how does this affect the stories we want to tell, and I mean I'm actively pitching a number of different things right now, and in a world that seems to still be responsive to developing and buying content, at least for the moment, and there's definitely this big swing of like, no, everyone just is, people want, they want comedies, they want blue skies, etc. But then as we're all sitting here and and consuming whatever content we're consuming, and one of the things that I think has been interesting has been these sort of like collective experiences of everybody watching Tiger King, or everybody watching, or then you go into like, subgroups of like everyone watching Normal People, or everybody watching Unorthodox, or everybody watching Black AF, or what have you, and suddenly having all this discourse about it that's more intense and deep because that's all we're doing. That's all we have. So that's been interesting to me. And I don't know if I'm coming out of it saying, oh yeah, we gotta step up the comedies, guys, because that's just not what killer, it's not really what we do, or at least not what everyone else thinks is a comedy. So I don't know. I guess at the end of it, I do believe that at the heart of every kind of difficulty, like difficulty, whatever, every kind of catastrophe like this, and New York has certainly lived through its share. There is some extraordinary art that comes out at the other side, and I believe that. I just don't know what those stories are yet. I mean, in some ways, what you're saying, John, or what I'm picking up from what you're saying, is that this kind of the kind of what you're finding in the pandemic, the systemic problems and racism existed beforehand, and you were starting to pick it out. And then the pandemic came, and it was like, yeah, you were not only right, you were so right. And now this is an even more extraordinary story. And that's sort of what I'm kind of holding on to, is exactly that.
Yeah, it was, and even with this story, it was not even, one of the reasons I appreciated it, it wasn't, obviously a lot of the work that I do is very race forward, and I have no problem with that. Well, this story was not solely about race. A lot of it was about class. A lot of it was about decision-making processes. But just in general, I have found that there are, if you're doing something again with a guy with a white hood, they go, okay, well, that's a bad guy. We see it. Right. We're going to go after him, whomever. Right. But in pitching stories, even before this, where it was, hey, there are these problems here. And again, I go back to my point about American Crime, where we did 30 episodes of systemic problems. There was not a good right. person or a bad person. So in getting a story, and this was one that came to me, where people saying, hey, this is a systemic problem. I thought, wow, this is, thank you. I could not be more excited. The thing that's distressing me was the concept that when we're actually seeing these systemic issues play out in real time, that the same folks who came with, hey, systemic issues are worthy of investigating, they were then pulling back and going, oh, you know what, we don't want to do it. So it was, it was beyond even race. It was not even like I could push the R button and go, oh yeah, you don't want to do it because you don't want to do stories about Black people. It was, wow, we're living this, and you're so risk adverse. And again, I understand the situation they're in. I'm not saying I don't see where the problem is, because everybody, again, Netflix is about the only company that's really inculcated against a lot of what's going on. But it was just to the question John was asking about, hey, what are these pandemic stories going to look like? From my experience, it's not going to be a systemic issue story. I'm sure there's going to be some great, interesting stories or parallel type storytelling. I just don't think in my place, it's going to be a systemic story.
Well, I'm feeling guilty because I ran over my time to ask questions, although I could do this for a long time. But we're going to turn this over to you, the viewer, to ask some questions, and I'm going to read them because I'm that guy. All right, here we go. Here's one from Aaron. In the absence of festivals, talent forums, and other global events, what can filmmakers and artists do now to empower themselves and access traditional gatekeepers to audiences? Agents, studio execs, programmers, distributors. Is this the ripe opportunity for disintermediation that we have all been waiting for?
What was that word?
Disintermediation. I'm not sure it's a word, but it's used often. So it's become a word. I think it's cutting out the middleman, for lack of a better word. And here's what I would say. I'm going to jump on this and maybe answer it slightly differently than the way it was asked, of course, is that I think that if this thing we're going through shows anything, it's sort of the inherent fragility of the institutions we have all relied upon, whether the studios, whatever, that we need permission from in order to be artists and deliver content to the public. I think of all of the components of the creative process, the most durable component of all is creativity. It's going to survive this. There'll be all sorts of transitions on how content is delivered. The people who were in charge before may not be in charge again, but the creators will always have what they have and be essential. And no matter what form this takes, it's what we're very dedicated to at Cinetic as a service company. We say that the 21st century is the era of the creator-centric studio. And I think we're going to see that all of these traditional gatekeepers are going to become less and less critical to creating and getting things out to the public. Obviously, the internet was a huge disintermediation tool. And if the internet weren't evolved to where it was now, this pandemic would be a very, very different situation. But I think coming out of it, the notion of going directly from a creator to an audience is going to be immeasurably easier. And the people who can help facilitate that are going to empower creators all the more. I don't know, I guess I'm sort of getting carried away here. Does anyone else have a thought on that?
I mean, I have some thoughts. It feels like I'm going to give you a sales pitch, because this is coming from my Drafthouse Films days and Neon days. The idea of if I'm understanding the word disintermediation, it's maybe not necessarily a good thing because the flow of people that try to bypass the system, if they will, may or may not have a good movie, right? And so I'm a big fan of if you have actually created something great, then sales agents generally are great curators of taste, right? And so I'm going to take it, way more seriously if John or one of his peers says, I know what you like. You're going to love this. Because basically there's a filter of the things that I'm not going to love, that are not very good, that come through a sales agent. And also, so I think that's really actually a good thing to have, that filter in a way. Otherwise, there's like thousands, tens of thousands of movies that are made every year, and not all of them are good. And we're only interested in investing in the good ones. So and the idea, I think it's also a little bit of a fantasy to think that there's an immediate creator to audience role that can sometimes find its way there, but it's also dependent upon the creator to develop some sort of a megaphone, some sort of an audience where, if you get to a certain level and say, I have created something, it is good, that there'll be enough people to reach on the first wave. So, I mean, I think part of it is about artists, unfortunately, having to work in the crass arena of self-promotion and building up a brand and building up your own self-sustainability through your own personal brand. And if you don't have that, you gotta call John Sloss or one of his other peers.
Well, I believe me, I'm not interested in making myself obsolete, but I know this, he's a controversial person, or maybe even not controversial, but Louis C.K. is a perfect example of disintermediation. He doesn't have an outlet through traditional distribution channels at this point. He created a stand-up special. He put it on his website and he sold it. And by all accounts, it's blown up. Kevin Smith is someone I've worked with for 25 years. He is someone who has been hardwired to his audience from day one, and he has cultivated them. And he's another guy who doesn't really need permission to go out and tell stories and create and connect to his audience. And I think, these aren't bad things. I mean, believe me, I've watched tens of thousands of bad movies, so you don't have to, Tim. So I hear what you're saying, but I think the future, actually, if we could find a better word for it, that'd be great. But the future is definitely about this kind of disintermediation. And I think this pandemic's only going to accelerate that. All right, next question. This is from a young man named Eric Cohn. I think we know him. Hi, everyone. I would love to hear what you all think about online festivals and whether you think they have the potential to support films and the industry on par with more traditional festivals. Would you allow your own films to play there? How does Sloss incite one of his famous bidding wars online? Oh my God, I didn't write that. This was from another human. I knew this question was going to come, and it had to come. It's an active debate. I would love to weigh in on it, but I will open the floor. Virtual festivals. Christine, you've got films in post, you've got films that are finished. What is your feeling about virtual festivals?
I think we're still kind of waiting to see what's going to happen in the fall. And I get, I really don't know. I mean, I know that we have one film in particular that would have been your typical go to a prestige film festival and sell out of there. And, if it was last year, it would have been a no-brainer. But because it's not last year, we're trying to figure out how do we measure the needs of the movie and also the filmmaker who wants to have a prestige launch for the film they've worked so hard on. But how do we create a sense of urgency when you're not all like running into a film theater in, Sundance, Cannes, Venice, etc., or Telluride, Toronto. And, I know there've been models that you're well aware of, John, that about everybody, a short video window and everybody watches it at the same time, etc. Whether that creates that urgency is yet to be seen. And we're still, I can't pretend we figured it out.
Tim, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. Yeah. I think you need to start with, what are the various purposes of a festival? And there's the uh, launching the film for all buyers at once and having that sort of frenzy around, okay, this is the moment, we've all seen it, let's run and figure it out. I don't think that necessarily works in a virtual setting. And I feel like the industry's kind of moved on already, in that movies that are heading towards a distribution, people are watching them individually on links, and it's a bit of a facade anyway, that festivals, like the second a movie screens at a festival, there's links that go out to people that aren't at the festival, and so it's halfway.
That is absolutely correct.
Yes.
And so it's already started that way. I mean, I love festivals. Like that's I love the energy. I love the big crowd. I love the excitement of seeing something for the first time with a group of people and feeling that reaction. It's why I love cinemas. But I don't think virtual festivals will serve that purpose for sales.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So here's where I can invoke Ira Deutschman, although he's probably gotten too much airtime to begin with. This is a famous quote he once said about the Toronto Film Festival. He said, go to Toronto and discount the currency and audience reaction by 35%.
Well, everybody who buys films actually has war stories where they get festival fever, they get all caught up and they overinflate their price tags. So
I don't believe in that. That's ridiculous.
It's maybe a better environment for buyers.
So yes, so that's all to say that you lose that completely with a virtual film festival. If it's about promoting a film before release, I can see the benefit of a virtual film festival, I guess. If it's about selling films, I would say absolutely not. Virtual film festivals benefit the film festival. They can kill the market for selling a film, and it certainly takes away from the person selling it, the sales agent, an ability to control the process. But another sort of point, because we've been talking to film festival heads for fall festivals, and this is kind of interesting, and it's maybe a hybrid that can work, possibly at Telluride, possibly in the New York Film Festival, maybe anywhere. And this is the idea of programming fewer films, screening them in more than one theater at a time, spreading people out so that an audience can see them within the protocols for the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Buyers can see them, influencers can see them, press can see them, the public can see them. And at the same time, they would stream to a conscribed group of people online so that you could actually have the effect of screening them live for an audience and get the conversation going for a big enough group of people to make up for the fact that there isn't this critical mass of people in the theater. And I think that struck me as a credible approach to a way back into festivals and festivals during this time as a way to sell films.
I think that actually works where if you're in a big enough metropolitan area where they have enough screens. Just speaking from my day job, we're going to be in a time with much reduced capacity until there's a vaccine, right? And so I would think something along those lines in New York could certainly work. Telluride feels a little more, problematic just because of the number of screens, right? If you're going to expand over 30 screens, you need 30 screens, right? So
I think they're actually they're expanding the way in which they can. They're extending the festival another day, Tuesday. So I think they will maybe program fewer films. I don't know. Julie Hunsinger and Tom Luddy could speak to this. And really screen them, at multiple theaters at once so that people can really spread out. I mean, obviously it's unfortunate for comedies who sort of rely on that energy and critical mass, but it could be a way back. I found it to be a very encouraging conversation. Okay, this is a question from Lance Tracy. What is the best strategy during the quarantine for independent films? Are talent more responsive to reading scripts right now? And how approachable are equity sources, private and traditional? This is both for John and Christine.
John, you should go first. I want to hear what you have to say.
I have no idea. I mean, that's the absolute wrong question for me.
You certainly know where to find the talent. I will say that. I've never been able to get in contact with people more readily in my entire career. And they seem to have time to read. I don't know.
I meant John Ridley, not you.
Well, he didn't want us to look at us.
Yeah, I can't speak to, I've got stuff in development. There are other people who are, producers who are going out to people. I wouldn't say they're indie films. So I don't, unfortunately, I appreciate you directing the question to me, but I have no insight into that. And I can't pretend.
Do you have how about you as a creative, as someone who receives, pitches and people trying to, wanting you to tell their stories? Has that changed?
I'm just going to pivot. When you said earlier we could answer, not the question you asked, but the question we want answered. I just saw a question pop up. Somebody asked me as a creator if I, where I want my film seen. And I would just say, well, if we take the word film out, we just talk about work. I'm sort of agnostic, and I've been very fortunate. I've worked in broadcast, I've worked in streaming, I've worked in indie spaces, books, graphic novels. For me, I think it's the right home for the right thing. And there are things that I loved about broadcast where people had to wait a week to see what was coming up. In indie spaces where there wasn't as much pressure in terms of the dollar return. I've worked on some really big films that have bombed horribly, and there's just a grinding of teeth. And that's not to say that an indie film, money is money to people, but you film, an indie film at a small level, it does what it does, and people are happy. It gets attention, it gets awards, and people are, I think, more happy. Everybody's happy when it makes money, but I'm saying the bar of success is lowered. So for me, when I have an idea and it feels like a book, I mean, I started writing a book again. I haven't written a book in years, but with a pandemic, and I don't want to say nothing to do. I have things to do, but it felt like, how can I challenge myself now? If it's just writing a script, I can do that. And I don't want that to sound arrogant, probably did, but I can do that in good days or bad days. I can develop with people in good days or bad days at home, but and by the way, also the proof of concept that we did, where we got 1/3 of the money from my corporate masters, but 2/3 of the money was out of my pocket. But it just felt like it's time to really bet on me. And I will say the times where I bet on me, it's not that they've been hugely successful necessarily, but every time I personally have felt better about me, about the work, and just through the cuts. I mean, one of the questions was, where do you want it seen? I'm just at that point in my life and my age and my career. Sometimes it's not how many people see it, but do the right people see it? And with this proof of concept, I know the right people are going to see it, and they're going to see the most pure expression of me. So I would just say to the folks at home, if wherever you are, how can you challenge yourself, even though you're in a box, to go one step further? So if you're normally writing TV shows and you've never written a film, write the film. If you only write TV shows, write the film. If you write TV and film, can you, write a book or a graphic novel or something else? And who are your friends that, while the big corporations are rightfully concerned about social distancing and lawsuits and insurance, what are the things that maybe you can do with you and your friends and go out and do something where you can keep it safe with a tiny footprint, but actually come up with product? And when people start coming out of this and thinking about product, you actually have something. Maybe it's just a proof of concept, but you put something together.
Thank you. I'm going to bookend this conversation with a question that I'm going to pose to all of you and ask you all to answer. This is a true story. Not that interesting, a little interesting. I was driving around this morning, and on the radio came this Old Faces song with a refrain, I wish that I knew what I know now when I was younger, sung by Rod Stewart, who actually used to be reasonably cool. And so I guess I will pose to you guys, if you could go back to your, and give some advice from where you are now to your 25-year-old self, living through what we're living through right now, what would that advice be?
I would just, may I jump in? I would just say, first of all, if Rod Stewart is watching, you're always cool. I want to distance myself from that remark. I would just say, I get it's not an unusual question what I would say to myself. I certainly, as a father, I try to give advice. When people ask me whether it's good advice or bad advice, I try to give it. Very honestly, I don't think I would tell myself anything, because God knows I made a million mistakes. I've done things wrong. I've angered the wrong people. But everything that I did, good, bad, I get to sit here with you all, and a handful of people, 619 as I look right now, are curious in at least me as one quarter of this quartet has to say. So, it's try not to upset your mom by the things that you do or say. And then beyond that, be safe and respectful. But I don't know. I think I would allow myself to make the same mistakes, because it ultimately it worked out okay.
Christine, what would you say to your 25-year-old self to get through this moment? Or
I'd probably say, buy real estate. Honestly, I mean, look, I'm just not that self-aware. I look forward, I don't look backward. Right now, I'm as enmeshed as probably everybody who is listening to this is. Like, how do we restart our business? What are we going to do? What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? That's really what I spend my days trying to figure out how to help content creators do their best work, and figure out, like, how are we ever going to actually bring it to fruition? And that's really it.
Would you take the same career path you've chosen?
As I said, I have no self-awareness whatsoever. So sure. I mean, what else would I do? Like,
you're feeling a little more wistful, or
I mean, that's like what? Like, I should have been a dentist? Like, what does that even mean?
Well, maybe you should have gone into real estate. I think your first answer probably was the right one.
Not going into real estate, simply acquiring a little real estate.
Well, that's a form of it. Christine or Tim, what do you got? Anything? Any advice to yourself?
Well, I think
you got into real estate.
In sort of contemplating the question, I have to think about my 25-year-old self. And I can tell you that my 25-year-old self had very little patience or regard for 50-year-old people. And so I think, like, the audience probably wouldn't have listened to what I would have told my 25-year-old self as a old 50-year-old man. So I do wish that I had learned a little bit more about business when I was a young person. I kind of entered into business without any training or understanding, just like arrogance and stupidity. And so I kind of, and like John, like, I think, I've certainly made a ton of mistakes, and it's the mistakes that really drill home the lesson. If somebody just tells you, if a 50-year-old man tells my 25-year-old self, this is what you do, I'm probably just going to go ahead and make that same damn mistake anyway. So, and making the mistake helps reinforce the solution.
Well, if I might log roll back to you, you've done a brilliant job of making up for lost time and your business acumen.
It's largely my wife. I drove the business into the ground when I was 24, and I cried and begged her to come, and then I've really never been in charge of the checkbook since, to this day. So I mean, I hire some good people, but I could have used a little more wisdom when I was younger.
Okay, listen, I really want to thank you guys. Obviously, picked the right group of people. To take care of a little administrative, I want to thank everyone at Cinetic, Steve Farnath, whose idea this was, Marcus Holzberg, Ross Freemer, and everyone there. I'd like to thank my life partner.
This isn't the fucking Oscars.
Ron Winkowski, who has a great podcast named A Different Tweed, and my incandescent daughter Lulu, and my righteous son Henry. And I just want to say, sorry, Christine, it's my bully pulpit. I just want to say that if the demand is popular, we will do these again. And as the nearly famous, nearly great filmmaker Ed Wood once said, my next film will be better.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, John. Put together. Bye.